This video is brought to you by Gardening Naturally. At this time of the morning, when the sun hasn't been beating down on these plants and the air is still cool and a little bit moist, you can hardly believe that we've been dealing with drought-like conditions here on the Isle of Man and here in the garden. But we have, and it's made it quite challenging to keep plants watered, to start off new seedlings, and to maintain the garden in a way that I would like, that we would like. So it has been fantastic that we've received quite a bit of rain recently, and we've been getting showers and quite heavy rain at times as well. Now, the Isle of Man's reservoirs are not filling, rather they've actually gone down since all of that. So there are still water measures here, which makes it especially challenging for home gardeners. But here in the veg patch, because we have been getting intermittent rains, I feel a lot more confident and comfortable with sowing seeds. There are ways to help get around sowing seeds and raising seedlings in drought-like conditions, and I introduced one just a couple of weeks ago. We'll revisit that when we have a walk around the garden here, and we'll have a look at that. But because we have been getting rains, I have decided to put in some seeds, so sow them direct in the garden for an autumn vegetable crop, or several crops rather. And we're going to have a look at that in just a little bit, along with the netting that I've put in back here. And also we'll look at the Polycrub. I've done some work since last week, and have a look at the container garden as well. And then discuss some of the things that I've been doing in the garden and some things that are coming up. I think it's going to be another stunner of a day here on the Isle of Man. Let's have a look at the veg patch. And if you hear any loud motorcycles in the background or cars, please disregard them. The Manx Grand Prix races are on here, and there are a lot of people on the roads, a lot of people visiting. Now, the veg patch looks quite a bit different, and we'll get to all of that exciting hoop action over there in one moment. But first, the black plastic bank. There's something new there. Can you spot it? It's a puddle. We've had rain and lots of it, and having a puddle is definitely a novelty these days. The top of the veg patch really looks like spring all over again. And actually, when you are sowing or starting an autumn garden, it really is a second chance at leafy greens and salads and radishes, spinach as well. If you've had a tough time this year with various conditions, see this as your chance to get those in, and you can have a garden full of lushness, even if your garden earlier on in the year wasn't as good. 2 weeks ago, I introduced you to the idea of using oyas to support seedlings through droughts. And they have been doing a great job. You can see, especially with this one here in the back, and all of these perpetual spinach plants are really benefiting from the reservoir of water just inside. And I topped these up just yesterday. So it's every 3 to 4 days they need a top up. There's a lot going on down here in these lower beds. Lots of summer vegetables, lots of plants jostled together, including quite a lot of the New Zealand yams, the oca, which are these plants. And they won't start producing tubers until after the autumn equinox, and then they'll start plumping up. And then this here, this is a rhubarb that I started from a tiny little stump of a root in the winter. And then we have courgettes, known as zucchini as well, across the pond. This one is the zephyr, And they're the yellow ones with the green pointy end on some of them, not all of them. You need to get in there and get picking. And then we have French beans along here. And you'd think that there aren't very many when you stand back and have a look at them growing, but there are tons in there. Josh and I stood here and picked a big freezer bag of them just recently. You just have to get in there and find them hiding. And then we've got a couple of more of the courgettes down here at the end. This one here is interesting. It looks like it's producing pumpkins, but these are just round courgettes, round zucchinis. You can use them in pretty much the same way. And then I've got a much more standard variety here. When I say standard, it's really starting to crawl along the ground. And you can see there's a courgette there. There's another one growing. And I wouldn't be surprised to find even more in here. I'll have to have a look. I've had all of these hoops and the netting for, what is it, 4 or 5 years now, and they've lasted really well, and they're protecting my newly sown seeds in here, not from birds just yet, which they're quite good at keeping birds out, but from Maggie. Maggie has, like other cats, decided that my vegetable beds are her litter trays, and I've caught Comet and Portia out here digging around as well, but it's mainly Maggie. So I'm trying to keep these seeds protected so they can germinate and grow without being dug up or ruined by cat mess. Anyway, lots and lots of seeds in here. I spent a good couple of hours out here yesterday. Josh brought up some composted manure from down at the bottom of the garden. And so we topped up these no-dig beds, and by putting a new layer of compost on top, just relatively thin, you refresh and rejuvenate the nutrients in the bed, also protect the lower levels so that they don't lose as much water, and it creates a nice new bed for vegetables to grow in. And so what I have sown in here is a mixture of leafy greens. Of course, I've got some chard here that I started off previously, but beside it, I have spinach. I've sown salad leaves, so lettuces, rocket, mustard. I've also put in quite a few radishes, both the typical salad types that you can slice up and have in salads or eat, but also winter radishes, which are hardier, bigger, spicier, and you can actually cook with. Also, back here, I've sown spring cabbage, and spring cabbage, you sow it in late summer, early autumn. It grows a little bit and then it sits through winter as small plants. And then next year when it starts warming up, that's when they spring back into life, and then you can get an early crop of spring greens. Many of the gardening products that you'll see in my garden, including the netting and the hoops in the veg patch right now, are from the sponsor of this video, Gardening Naturally. They're a family-run business in the UK that provides gardening solutions and alternatives that enable you to grow fruit and veg without pesticides. Their products are natural and safe to use around children, pets, and wildlife. Their most iconic products help gardeners protect crops from pests in the most eco-sensitive ways possible. That includes nematodes, slug traps, brassica collars, and high-quality netting, fleece, and hoops. I have and use Gardening Naturally's butterfly netting and their finer veggie mesh, which is brilliant at keeping carrot root flies and even flea beetle off your crops. Gardening Naturally also has products that help you transform waste into black gold for the garden. The bokashi bins that I use to pre-compost kitchen waste are from Gardening Naturally, as is the bokashi brand that I use inside them. They also supply fruit cages and vegetable supports, like my strawberry cage and the pea and bean dome frame you've seen in my garden before. You'll even find watering and pond products, automatic greenhouse window openers that don't use electricity, and items that will make your garden a wonderful place to spend time for both you and your local wildlife. Gardening Naturally is offering you a 5% discount on products on their website with the code GREENS05
on gardeningnaturally.com. There's a link in the video description, and the code is valid for any products aside from biologicals and nematodes.
Last week's Polycrub video was quite popular, and since then I have been harvesting a lot more tomatoes in particular from this space. And even though I came out here yesterday and picked quite a few, I can see quite a lot of red in here. So I'll be out here again later picking more. And I've also been doing some work to help hold some of these plants back. And also I've removed some of the cucumber plants that were just here in the front because they were producing still, but they were getting powdery mildew, and I didn't want that to start affecting more of the plants in here. So I made that executive decision to remove them. Let's have a look down here at the end because I want to show you the melons, which you can see a lot better now. It looks a little extreme, but I decided to remove all of the lower foliage just to help this plant avoid getting too much in the way of powdery mildew. It was already starting to get affected, but this will help to keep the upper leaves a little bit better protected. And these leaves that are up here will continue to grow and to feed these fruits. You can also see that a lot of the melons are supported by strings now. They're just getting so heavy. And I came out yesterday to find that these plants had started slipping down their strings because of the weight of these. And so not all of the melons, but most of them now have a string supporting them that goes up to the bamboo canes up there. So lots and lots of strings. It looks kind of like a puppet show in here now with all of the strings holding up our vegetables. But they're doing a good job. These are not ripe yet, but I hope they will be soon. There's a lot of them, way more than I thought these two plants would produce, and they're still going strong.
Each time, practically, that I come into the Polycrub, I'm not only harvesting food, but I'm removing foliage. And I've been removing foliage from the tomatoes, and that helps to create more airflow underneath the plant, but also it speeds up the ripening process. There are a couple of questions left in the comment section of my last video, and I'd like to address them because it's really important, I think, in understanding how the Polycrub works and how these beds are working as well. We are dealing with very dry conditions here on the Isle of Man. A lot of people are dealing with dry conditions in Britain, across North America, in many other places. And so keeping on top of watering and putting in water saving and water retentive strategies is really important. I am manually watering these 3 beds in the Polycrub every 3 to 4 days. And it does take a lot of time. I had planned on putting in drip irrigation this year, but it didn't happen. It will happen for next year though. You can be sure of that. Now, because I use so much compost in my beds, both the beds out in the garden and in here, that compost, that organic material latches on. It absorbs water like a sponge and it can slow release it. Also, used as a mulch on the surface, not only does it absorb moisture, but it creates kind of a hard crust on the top and it keeps moisture locked in down below. This is one of the pitfalls of not filling beds, especially raised beds, with the proper mix. If you don't have enough material in there that holds onto moisture, then they dry out. The other question, and I've had lots of people ask this question, is how do pollinators get inside the Polycrub? And I thought that it was apparent. There are 2 doors back behind me and just here in the front. They are the main ventilation for the Polycrub, and this is where I come in and where lots of insects come in as well. This place is humming with bees right now, humming with all different types of insect life. And there's worms in the bed. They find their ways in. This is not an airtight structure. There are vents all along the sides as well. There's areas where Maggie can even crawl in under the side. This is not a closed environment. And if you grow plants that are attractive to pollinators, they will find them. Now, also, not all the crops in here require insect pollination anyway. The sweet potatoes here in front of me, they don't need insect pollination. The basil to produce the leaves, they don't need pollination. And tomatoes do not require pollinators either. They benefit from having bumblebees buzz around them and to spread the pollen around. But these are self-pollinating crops and wind pollinated as well. So not necessary to have insects for them, but always a good idea. And don't worry, there are tons of insects and pollinators in the Polycrub.
It's starting to warm up, and the container garden back here on the patio is prepared for more dry weather. I've been keeping on top of watering. As you can see, the plants are looking pretty lush for the most part, including the lemon balm over here. And I've placed it right below the tap so that any moisture that drips from down there goes straight into the pot rather than is lost. And the short hose so I can fill the watering cans right here. Everything is looking pretty good though, although I am a little bit worried about them being against this really warm, hot south-facing wall. They seem to be doing okay though, as are all of these plants in containers here. They're even flowering, so that's a good sign. And you can see that the leaves don't look too stressed on a lot of them. The apple trees have been bowing over in the heat though, so I've removed a lot of the apples. You can see them just here. And they taste fairly ripe, so I'll be using them to cook with. I'll be making a crumble probably tomorrow. The greenhouse has been getting mega hot in here, but I've tried to group again a lot of the plants together, put them in trays, and they're kind of hunkering it out. Some are not doing too well though. I have taken some cuttings of the thornless blackberries, and I might have to move them outside. These two, you can see in the back, haven't survived. That one's doing okay back there. And then we've got valerian here as well. And I brought these from the allotment so that I can have a supply of valerian here in the home garden. Up here, these are all grouped together as well. We've got the tuberous begonias. These are perennials. And then there's quite a few dahlias that I didn't find space for in the garden just yet. And they're all just sitting there in their little puddle of water, staying alive. And then Maggie, hey, what have you been doing all morning? She's been gone for about 5 hours. What have you been doing? What have you been doing?
Maggie has the right idea. Stay in the shade, stay cool. Which brings me to all of these plants that I have over here in these trays. These were all containers that I had spread out here on the patio, around the edges, in the greenhouse even. And what I've done is I've grouped them all together, and I've also placed them in these trays to capture moisture and also to make for easy watering. And you'll know from my video on tips for a lush and bountiful container garden that you really should water containers once a day, especially in hot weather. But even then, they can dry out, especially if they're sitting in the sun, and it's very sunny back here, very warm. And so grouping them together helps to create a little bit more cover, so it reduces the amount of moisture that's evaporating, and also setting them in trays captures any moisture that comes out through the bottom. They can reabsorb it if it's sitting there. These also create areas where birds and other animals can come and have a drink. And to keep topped up on water, you can water directly into these trays. These trays are specifically for tomato grow bags So they're pretty common here. You can find them in most garden centers. But if you don't have something similar, you can find other types of trays and pot saucers to put your plants in as well. I'm not out here folding bed sheets. We're gonna get to this in a second. But first of all, just wanna say, August, it is the height of summer. Not only in temperature, but also in the harvests. All of the tomatoes and the different crops that are coming out of the garden, for me, coming out of the Polycrub on a daily basis, piling up on the kitchen counters, and we're just all consumed with how do we eat this, how do we preserve this, what are we gonna do with all of this? And so when you are a bit distracted by all of the food coming in, you can kind of get forgetful of the fact that you can be sowing seeds right now, that you can continue the harvesting into autumn, into winter, and beyond. And so make sure that you sow some seeds and stick with types that you know will grow well before your first frost, or that will overwinter and give you a crop early next year. And for me, that's a lot of leafy greens. It's also thinking about spring cabbage, things like that. Now, once you have those seedlings, once you have those plants, you have to think about their growing conditions, because it's not going to stay nice and sunny forever. We're going to start getting darker days, colder temperatures, winds coming in. And so protecting our young plants and giving them a better environment to grow in will ensure a better harvest. Now, I have the Polycrub, but you might not have a greenhouse or a polytunnel or a Polycrub. And so having a covered growing area is maybe not going to be feasible, but you can create one in the garden. And I do this regularly to extend the season both ways, into spring and autumn, by using garden fleece. It says white material here. This is from Gardening Naturally as well. And if you drape this over hoops or supports and then use pins, and Gardening Naturally has pins as well, but you can also use stones and bricks just to hold down the sides, and I tend to do that. Underneath, you create this nice, warm, greenhouse-like environment that protects plants from wind and from frost and snow and from birds and from Maggie. And you can continue growing under there even when other plants outside of that space look a bit battered and maybe have stopped growing and stopped looking as appetizing. So garden fleece is one of the tactics to use if you want to extend your season. And if you want to get a hold of this or anything else, definitely take Gardening Naturally up on their 5% discount. So that's the code GREENS05 at gardeningnaturally.com. Fantastic company, highly recommend them, and it's been such a pleasure working with them for this sponsored video because I love the brand. So it's a win-win situation. And it's a win for you as well because you get a bit of a discount. And if you're interested in any of the products that I've shown in this video that are Gardening Naturally, I'll leave links to each of them down in the video description. And then that way you can go over there and check them out. And don't forget to use the discount code. Right, thanks for coming along with me at looking at the garden in August. I'm going to be off next week, so there's no video next week. It's going to be a much needed holiday for me. And I will be back soon after that with some more gardening ideas and content that will hopefully help you along in your gardening path as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.